Well, hello! Another quad review today. I'm actually doing it for a magazine, but I thought I have to share it with you guys as it's pretty exciting stuff. It's the ImmersionRC Mojo 230. This is actually the one from Horizon Hobbies, which is basically a bind and fly, so if you've got a Spectrum transmitter you can just turn it on and go. I haven't, so I'll be swapping out a receiver. It comes in this lovely moulded box, of which I've already got it out, and it looks like this, which is gorgeous. Yeah, so this had this SPM 4648 Spectrum receiver. I've swapped this out for a FreeSky XSR. Why an XSR? Nobody ever uses those, do they? The XSR was basically a kind of depinned X4R with its just single little connector instead of servo leads. The reason I do that is what you get inside the box with the Vortexes are little cables like this. This cable plugs into the receiver port. This then goes to your S-Bus receiver, so I could cut that off and I could solder that up to an XM Plus. This one is obviously configured for 3.3 volts, which goes to the Spectrum receiver. And what they have in the box, they have one that plugs directly into an XSR, so I just use that one. The XSR I've actually stolen from another quad. This wasn't my first ImmersionRC Vortex. I've got this, which was another magazine review for the Vortex 150. And this flew pretty good. I found it a little bit heavy for the size, but this should give somewhat increased performance. Really intensely powerful motors. These are 2206 2300s, and it's running, these are HQ 5 by 4 by 3 by 3 bladed props. Actually quite thin, but according to ImmersionRC they give the best mix of power and flight time, so that'd be good to use. Anyway, so what you get in the box is obviously this. I've added my receiver already, and to do that you've just got these Torx screws. Just take those out, slide it off, and you can just get inside and plug in. You need the right size of receiver. XM Plus, XSR is fine. Something like an actual X4R would be too big. I'll show you what that looks like inside. And then you've got these little holes here to take the antennas out, alternatively here at the sides, which you could then use some sort of zip tie or something to do stuff if you want to, but that's not a bad angle to go along with. Also in the box is a little Spiranet antenna, which then looks like that. Two sets of the HQ props, some basic instructions, but you'll need to download the proper ones from the website if you really want to know. A selection of these little cables that I mentioned, and a few spares. These are basically skid plates. If you look on the side here, you've got these 4 raised plastic things, so if you go down something hard it will skid on those and not hit this PCB. It's me from several weeks later. I just wanted to go over these little plastic parts that I mentioned earlier. Now I mentioned earlier these were for skid plate replacement, and it's quite easy to think that is the case because they kind of look like that, but when you look a little bit closer they're the wrong size, and these are a little bit of a source of confusion. I saw on the Facebook Vortex 230 page people talking about these and not sure what they are, so I checked it out. I asked Sander Sasson, who co-founded ImmersionRC, because I just couldn't figure it, and this is what they're for. If for some reason you don't like these plastic covers here that cover the ESCs, you can take these off and then you take your ESC to the carbon bit. This then would fill the gap. If you look right in the corner, there would be a gap under that carbon piece, and this is where these would go in to actually replace that bit. So that's what they're there for. But I couldn't figure out why anybody would want to remove these because they're quite a nice protection. So it is carbon with these plastic surround parts. Fairly heavy but very, very strong. I really like the fact that this camera is completely covered if you try to slam it into anything. I say slightly famously managed to slam this directly into a tree. I thought I'd do some tree flying, but of course with that weight comes a little bit of inertia, so I didn't really go out that much and smacked it straight in. I did expect it to be in complete pieces, but it actually survived very well, so I'm quite taken with the little ImmersionRC quads. So one of the reasons I wanted to highlight these ones is often people are a little bit scared when I sort of say, okay, let's go into Betaflight and do this, that and this. I suppose if you're not familiar with a piece of software or you haven't done much on computers, the idea that you have to go into a bunch of settings that you don't understand and set things up is a little bit intimidating. So some people have asked, like, what is the easiest sort of quad to get going well? And basically it's these, the Vortexes. Two reasons for that. First is the setup part that I'll come to in a second. And the next part is the tunes they've done. I know there's a bunch of tunes from Chad Nowak on this one, Final Glide Oz, and he did the ones on the Vortex 150 that flew superbly out of the box, really, really well. So there's some other guy's one as well, who I can't remember his name, I apologise, but I'll look at that in a second. But yeah, the setup. The point of the setup with the Vortexes are that you don't need to plug it into a computer. You should be able to plug a battery in. The VTX will default to 5740 or Fat Shark channel 1, and you should be able to use a wizard to detect the type of transmitter you're using, whether it's S-Bus or Spectrum or something else, can't remember which else, and just guide you through some movements. After that point, you should then be able to use the sticks to do any settings you want, including of course video channel selection, because this has got a tramp inside, and any pitch tuning. Of course, if you did want to upgrade any of the firmware, there is a USB port here, although we're kind of warned not to just put on random versions of Betaflight. It does run Betaflight, but it goes hand in hand with its own software which talks to Betaflight, so you don't want to go out of sync if the API's changed and you have to do different ways of getting the data from Betaflight, then it might not work. So ImmersionRC have their own updater to actually update the firmware on this. I haven't even looked at this to see what it is yet. So firstly, let's plug in and we'll go through the actual wizard setup for it. Okay, this is a bit of a weird view, but I've got my goggles on and recording, got my Tyrannus ready. So I'm going to plug in here and go through the wizard. So, plug it in. Let's see what it says. Okay.
Telemetry lost.
Oh, I'm too close.
Telemetry recovered.
Okay, S-Bus, that's what it's got. Yep, clear central controls. Click this one, I suppose. Okay, move roll controls left and hold. Move the opposite direction, hold. Or neutral, your left and hold. Down. Pitch control down. Left stick back and left. Oh no, hang on. Level quad. Move right stick back and hold, just to make sure this is level, which it isn't.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
Move right stick back and hold. Neutral. And we're done.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered. Telemetry lost.
It's playing the Super Mario theme.
Now, as I mentioned, it's entirely possible to then go ahead and fly your Vortex without ever touching a computer. Now, this works because it's set to arm with the sticks, and channel 5 is set to switch between acro, horizon and angle. Of course, if you don't like stick arming and disarming, as I don't, especially if you've ever gone upside down and tried an inverted yaw spin and find yourself disarming yourself, this is one reason you'd like to actually go into Betaflight and change this. So this was the only change I made. I went into Betaflight, I added arming on a switch, I put angle mode in as a possible, I put beeper in, although it sounds a beeper by itself, I like it on a switch as well, and I put air mode in, and that was all I changed. I should mention that I'm doing this slightly out of order. I thought I recorded this earlier when the Betaflight version started on 317 before I upgraded it, but I'll come to the upgrade in a second. Terrible wind noise at the field, so I'll skip over this bit. What I'm saying is I'm just going to test its line of sight footage, and here that is. As you'd expect, no big dramas here, so let's get on and go to the FPV Maiden now. Okay, so we're up in the air onto the Maiden, and yeah, it's ridiculously easy to fly. Couple of notes about the OSD. This is the default OSD. It's called the Easy OSD. It's sort of a bit like that. So it's a bit different to your normal Betaflight layout. You've got the mode over on the right hand side there, so it shows whether air mode's on with the mode. So there's an acro, and this is acro with air mode on. We've got the channel and band and the power over on the left hand side, along with my call sign, which I haven't changed, so it just still says IRC OSD. The bottom right, you'll notice we've got this timer. What it does, it dynamically tries to work out how long you'll be able to fly in that battery. So if I was to fly exactly like this all the time, I might get 8 minutes out of it. But of course, as soon as you start hitting the throttle, and here's me a couple of flights later, that's going to shrink down, and it's more normal to get, the normal 3 to 4 minutes out of a 1300. But I like the OSD, it's quite functional, all looking good. Same with the camera. So this was potentially the most locked in quad I've ever flown out of the box. When you do like a spin or flip on this thing, it was noticeable exactly how well it would just stop completely in the right place without any hint of any sort of bounce back or anything. That was really impressive. The tuning out of this was really nice. Really like that. So easy to fly. And although these props haven't got the biggest pitch in the world, they really give a lot of control through the throttle range. So you've got a little bit more finesse on the throttle just to manage your altitude perfectly. But if you want to go up, you slam that throttle on, it jumps up in the air quite nicely. No problems at all there. So I shoved on a GoPro just to see how that would do. Now, this was actually used for my review on the Foxeer box. So this was the GoPro session, the sort of before trying the Foxeer one. So it's not particularly exciting, it's just sort of going around a bit, and you can see it is pretty damn smooth. I'm keen to see though how that specific mounting they've got for the GoPro, instead of just basically mounting it on a foam block with a battery strapped around it, will fare, because obviously it's a little bit more of a neater solution perhaps. But yeah, super duper. I put 4 batteries for it. Absolute pleasure to fly, not a problem at all. I thought though, as this was out of the box settings, this is Betaflight 317, I should at least update it to its latest and greatest firmware and see if there was any difference or how it would perform. Normally, I have to say I wouldn't really touch it because it's flying absolutely fine. It didn't seem there didn't seem a real reason to update it. So all that flying was done with what it came with, which was 317, and to be honest, it was flying so good I'd probably leave it like that. But I thought it might be handy just to show you how you upgrade these things, because it's slightly different, because there's an interdependency between ImmersionRC's own OSD code, as it were, and the way it talks to Betaflight. So they're quite tightly nestled together. So in order to upgrade them, instead of just going to the Betaflight page, you're best off coming to the ImmersionRC page, and what they do is they bundle their Vortex firmware along with Betaflight. So it's up to 322 at the moment, which is often a couple of bits behind, but that's just how it is. It's better to do this than potentially put on the latest Betaflight and have it not quite work. They also comes with its own configurator. This is still a Chrome app. Obviously the Chrome App Store's gone, but this will still install as a Chrome app and run that way. Here's one I started earlier. So you don't want to connect, you just want to say flash firmware. Let's pick the firmware. God, this is slow for 182k. Come on. Okay, we like that. OSD upgrade is completed. So now let's upgrade Betaflight. And here's the hex file. And away it goes. Making interesting little chirping noises along the way. Now I have saved my Betaflight settings, although I don't know exactly how they might change. So what I'll probably do is just run the wizard again and just put my modes back on, as the modes were the only thing I actually did, and that's only going to take 2 seconds. And that's all done. Before we go and look at a bit more flying, I just wanted to show you the OSD. What you have to do is hold your left stick down and to the left for a couple of seconds, and you go into the OSD menu. And it's quite different from a normal Betaflight OSD, so worth pointing out here. You've got a whole bunch of setups, and you've got instead of having OSD that you can set specifically, you have these, they call them landscapes, but I'll show you those in a second. So we'll set the LEDs on the quad. The big one, of course, is the video transmitter setup, where you can change your band, channel frequency and power, this has really hampered this particular one from Horizon. So I can go from low to 25 milliwatts. You'll also see that there's little X's on certain channels which have deemed to be illegal in Europe, so they're not even available. Another great thing is you can go in and change your camera setup. Now this is a fairly new thing in Betaflight with the right hardware. It's been in the Vortex quads for a while now. This is equivalent to plugging in the little OSD joystick into your camera and going through the settings there. I didn't actually need to change any settings. They're all good for me. Basically, if WDR's on and night mode is set to color, that's good enough for me. But obviously you can go through this and you can change all the little bits and pieces you need to. Now the PID tuning was a little bit different as well. It's slightly hidden away here. And one thing I noticed, it didn't support changing your PID profiles via the stick movements. You have to do it via here. But you've got all your normal Betaflight things in here. They're just in a slightly different format and hidden in a slightly different way. Of course, one of the things the Vortex have got is the Pro Tunes, which are really nice. There's the Final Glide Alpha one, there's one by Gapit, and the one that came in on this new version of the firmware is by Botgrinder. I tried them all out. They're all really, really nice. The one that worked best for me was the Final Glide Oz. It felt a little bit more flowy, if that makes sense. Another really good thing it has is this motor test thing. I mean, this is something you do with the props in, but it's a way of being able to test whether your motors are firing up and acting the same. So if you think you've got a problem, quite a good one to use. But anyway, that's the OSD. Quite a lot in there, and it's all kind of the same stuff as the Betaflight OSD, but sort of different and hidden about. So let me show you now how those 3 different OSD layouts actually look. Okay, so this is the Air Race OSD. The idea is it's a very minimal one. It doesn't really show as much information as I'd like, to be honest. I'm actually in air mode as well as acro mode, but it doesn't really show me that. And I think down the bottom you've got basically the battery indicator. So I might at least want to see voltage or something like that. But you know, I can live with this one. It's not the worst ever thing. So this is the one called HUD, and in my opinion this is the worst ever thing. Doesn't give you any information about battery voltage, timer. It just gives you this sort of weird like F16 like head-up display, which, like most of these things, is really quite slow to react and not particularly useful. I don't really get this one. It's kind of a bit of a waste of time for me, but you know, it's there in case that's what you want to do. And this is the default one, and in my opinion the best. This is the Easy OSD version of the OSD. I mean, it would be useful if you could certainly go and change things around and that. For example, like if I had an RSSI indicator, I don't think there's anywhere I could put that. I mean, that was another reason I went for the XSR, is because I've got the inbuilt telemetry signal as opposed to having to show the RSSI. So, you know, it's great, it's nice, but it's not perfect by any means. I'd still prefer to be able to move stuff around if I wanted to. Anyway, so this was my flight as of upgrading to the latest version of the OSD firmware and Betaflight. Tell you the truth, I couldn't really feel any difference. It still felt good, but it felt really good before. So that much was at least consistent. And here's the flight, and I'm using the Foxeer box camera here, which looks a little bit more squished than the GoPro session, but it's still pretty good. I didn't really have any exciting flights other than around this field because everything's so wet at the moment. I had nowhere to go, so it's kind of a bit dull there. Hopefully I'll do some nicer flights with it as the weather improves, because it's particularly easy thing to take around, and it's fairly well protected from getting crashes and that, so you don't have to treat it too gently. I did want to talk about the Pro Tunes here. As I mentioned, they came from Final Glide Oz, Gapit and Botgrinder, and I did try them all out, and I recorded them with the idea of saying this is this one and here's how it looks, and this is this one. But of course when you fly them, they pretty much look the same, although they feel completely different. One thing I did want to mention, because although they feel very tuned and extremely locked in. And as I said before, Chad Nowak Final Glide Oz's felt like my sort of flying style. And I can't quite put my finger on what I would say. It felt more flowy, but that gives the others a bit of a disservice. It just suited me. What I will say is, for the beginner point of view, it's not particularly friendly. If you look at the PIDs we've got here, and what I did, I loaded each of the Pro Tunes into each of the PIDs so I could just swap between them. Here's Chad's, here's Gapit's, and here's Bot Grinder. You'll notice that the rates are fairly heavy duty. They're you've got to be quite gentle on your sticks to really get the best out of them, and that doesn't particularly suit a new pilot very well. So I wish there were a few more. There should be a few more sort of beginning or intermediate acro flying modes there, and I think that would make the transition from going from what ImmersionRC say is like, oh, start off on acro and horizon, use 3S, which I don't particularly agree with. I would say, yes, start off with 3S, but you want to go straight to acro if you can. You just want to fly it more gently. So it leaves the sort of beginner in a position where they need to tune their rates down a bit, which isn't the world's most difficult thing, but it would be nice if the tunes were there. So not so much a pro tune as more like an amateur tune, if you like, or a pro tune for amateurs. I don't know, something like that. That's just my opinion anyway. As far as this flying goes, it was lovely. I mean, it's really hard to fault. It was you really notice that the battery is in the centre of gravity so when you do a roll, it feels like you're rolling right on the axis, which is really nice. And I've mentioned before about just how well it stops, and that's a really noticeable thing. The other thing I tend to like to do is sort of fly low along things and keep that low altitude and sort of sweep round. And the throttle control I had, and as a combination of the motor's ESCs and also these props, made it really easy just to hold my altitude just as I wanted. I had more fine control there than I felt I did with a normal quad, which might have bigger pitch props. Yeah, no complaints. Loved it. Beautiful quad.
So there you go. That is the ImmersionRC Vortex 230 Mojo, albeit the Horizon Hobby version. I really like this. This is pretty much the sort of pinnacle of out-of-the-box flyers. I can't think of a machine that quite gets it this right. So yeah, this is pretty much a superb quad. Of course, you don't get it for nothing. It's not cheap. I think it's just gone down, so it's about $329 at the moment. So it is not a cheap quad at all. And if I were to buy my own one, I probably wouldn't buy the Horizon version. A, because I'm not a Spectrum flyer. B, because it does, for the EU version, it hampers the Tramp at a maximum output of 25 milliwatts. And although that's fine when I'm flying around a field on my own and stuff, if I happen to be sharing it where people are flying like 200 and they can't put the power down, there's a chance of them wiping out my signal. So I'd prefer to have the flexibility of being able to change it. And if you buy the regular one, the Tramp goes from like 1 milliwatt to 600 milliwatts, which would be a better option. But yeah, I mean, if you are a Spectrum flyer and you want to fly, the legal EU limit, and you absolutely don't want to have to go into this and change your receiver for anything, then there's this one for you. Now, I've flown this quite a lot more than my normal test quads, because I was also checking out the Foxeer box. I used to do a review of it, and I've taken this, I attempted to take it away on holiday, but I didn't manage to do any flying with it, unfortunately. I moaned about the not being able to put it back in a box with the props on, but it's actually pretty easy to obviously take the props off. I can even put the camera and a couple other bits in the box with it, fold it all up, and it goes back in the box pretty easy for travelling. So that I really like. There's not really too much to dislike, to be honest. I mean, aside from the Tramp being hampered, but that's just this edition. You've got to be quite careful about when you put your battery on that you don't get any spare leads, because they will get chopped by the propellers pretty easily. And it's quite tricky to get the battery in when you've got the camera on like this. I don't know if it's going to be better with, there's a specific session TPU injected mount they do now. Maybe that's better. but it restricts the amount of room you've actually got to put the battery on there as well. But even without that, it's a joy to fly. They've done a really good job with the power system. I seem to have so much throttle control, and if you're into sort of getting low and being able to keep there all around the nice sweeping turns and stuff, this felt a lot easier than other quads. I mean, it's not hard with other quads. This just felt like effortless in comparison. So really, I mean, basically it's a really good flyer. So in terms of its competition, I think the only thing that comes close is the Holybro Coppice 1. There's aspects I like on both more. I mean, I like the session mount on this better, and easier to get to the battery, but I don't like the way the antenna's mounted for FPV signal, and I don't like the ESCs are covered quite well, but you've got these loose wires kind of sat around there. But this flew extremely well out of the box, I have to say. Despite not having those Pro tunes available, it was still an awesome quad, and it still is. This is a little bit more expensive, and it's still got awesome tunes. So it's weird. It's kind of more beginner friendly from a setup point of view, but the tunes in it don't necessarily work for the beginner unless you do a little bit of tweaking with it. But that said, it is a superb quad. If you've got the money and you're starting out, this will shortcut a lot of your setup problems. It's also pretty damn tough. Yeah, the custom firmware on this one just raises it just that little bit above the norm. It just does a little bit more. I'm very happy. It is a joy to fly, so yeah, it's a great quad. I will be flying it some more for sure. This wasn't supplied by anybody, so it's not like an affiliate thing, but check out, I'll put a link to the Immersion website where they'll list their dealers that you can look at in your own country to buy them from. Obviously this came from Horizon Hobby, I'll put a link there as well. I'll have a link to the Coppice one as well, because I think that's similar but different. Anyway, that's my review of the Vortex Mojo 230. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.